Welcome to Fields of Change, an audio video series brought to you by the Foundation for Agrarian Studies. In the lead up to the FAS International Conference on Agrarian Change to be held from November 6 to 9, 2025 in Trivandrum, Kerala, India, we bring you conversations with leading scholars on major themes around agrarian change, including land and labor, rural living standards, science and technology in agriculture, and the impact of climate change. In Part 2b, we continue our conversation on poverty and standard of living with Professor Madhura. Poverty cannot be measured solely in terms of income and consumption, as aspects related to the standard of living are also used to understand it. What are the additional dimensions of poverty that must be focused on?
Very important point. Income or access to resources is one component, one very important component, but only one component of what we think of as necessary to live a healthy life. And one of the issues which is very important is nutrition security or food security. So this depends on many things, of which income is only one. And we have a recent definition, which I think is very useful, is to look at the cost of a healthy diet. So not just the cost of a minimum number of calories, but what would it cost to be able to have a well-nourished diet with fruits and vegetables and adequate proteins and micronutrients and so on. And the latest report of the FAO, State of Food Insecurity 2024, says that about 41% of Indians cannot afford a healthy diet. So this is over 500 million people. And I think this gives us another way of looking at what are the kinds of deprivations in India. As you rightly mentioned, you need adequate housing. And I think it's important to remember that the right to housing has actually been a part of workers' rights with the ILO for many, many years. Because you must have adequate water, you must have sanitation, you must have light, electricity, water. So it's not just the question of having a kacha or pakka structure. It's also a question of basic amenities that a person needs to live a decent life. And I think this is very much part of what we think of today as the concept of human development. Enhancing human development, not just ensuring adequate water or adequate food or any one of these components, but all the components needed to lead a full life.
Rural wages are often taken as a proxy for poverty. Over the last decade, real wages have remained largely stagnant. What are the implications of this stagnation for poverty and deprivation in rural areas?
Since the majority of the rural poor depend on incomes from manual labor or incomes from labor, maybe unskilled, maybe semi-skilled, may even be skilled, the wage rate and the days of employment are two very important parameters in deciding earnings of worker households. And our village surveys have shown that the majority of the rural poor come from manual worker households or poor peasant households who also depend a lot on earnings from labor. Some of our village studies, where we collect the data on the days of employment and the wage, based on that, we did a calculation a few years ago that a manual worker family, one male and one female worker, adult, two workers, would have to work for about 600 days in the year to earn the minimum extreme poverty line level of earnings at the current wage rate. So obviously the wage rates are very low. Manual workers can't work for 300 days in the year. They would be exhausted within a year. So I think that raising wages is very, very essential. And this has to be part of the strategy for the majority of households who are dependent on workers. Having said that, there are big differences in male and female wages across the country as elsewhere in the world. There are also big variations across states. And we know that only a few states, and Kerala's leads in that, have relatively higher wages as compared to other states. And there's a very interesting calculation done a few years ago. What share of a daily worker's wage would be required to meet a healthy diet? So this is a cost of a healthy diet for one person for one day as compared to the daily wage rate. And for a male daily worker in Bihar or Gujarat, he would have to spend about 67 to 70% of that wage just to buy his own healthy diet. The only state where that ratio is a little better is Kerala, where it's about 30%. So 70% of the daily wage worker's wage would be left to feed others in the family or to spend on other items other than food. So this shows you that the absolute level of wages in most parts of India are still very, very low. And the fact that real wages have stagnated for the last few years is really very unfortunate, because that is one of the most important means of enhancing earnings and reducing poverty.